There was a black SUV parked in front of the Hargrove and Whitfield real estate office on a Tuesday morning in October, and nobody thought anything of it. Not until the man stepped out. He was wearing work boots, the kind with dried mud still caked around the soles. His jacket was faded canvas, the sort you buy at a farm supply store, and there was a small tear at the left elbow that had never been mended. He was a black man, somewhere in his mid-50s, with close-cropped gray at his temples and a patient look about him, the kind of patience you only develop when you've spent decades working land that doesn't care how tired you are. He walked through the front door of that office and asked to speak with someone about a property listing. What happened next became the talk of Simcoe County for years. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome to Heirloom Tales. We tell the stories that don't make the evening news but stay with you long after you've heard them. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment when we're done. I want to know what you would have done in his shoes. His name was Cornelius Boateng, and in Simcoe County, Ontario, he was known, if he was known at all, as the man who kept the old Boateng farm on the 7th line. 43 acres of cash crop his father had bought in 1971, and that Cornelius had been working ever since. He drove a second-hand pickup. He wore the same kind of boots his father had worn. He did not advertise himself. That was, it turned out, a choice. The office that morning was quiet. A young receptionist named Kayla Marchetti looked up from her desk when Cornelius came in, and she smiled the kind of smile that is polite without being warm. She asked if he had an appointment. He said he didn't, but that he was interested in the Dunmore estate listing. 1,200 acres of agricultural land, and a heritage farmhouse that had been sitting on the market for 14 months. The asking price was listed at $4.2 million. Kayla Marchetti looked at him for a moment, just a moment, and then she said the agent handling that file was very busy, and perhaps he could come back another time, or she could take his number and have someone call him. Cornelius said that would be fine. He gave her a number. He thanked her. 3 days passed. Nobody called. He went back on Friday. This time a different person was at the front desk. A man in his 30s, named Trevor Holt, junior agent. A blue tie he'd straightened 3 times since morning. Trevor looked up and recognized Cornelius, even though they had never met, because Kayla had apparently mentioned the man who came in asking about the Dunmore listing, and then laughed in a way that didn't need explaining. Trevor told Cornelius that the Dunmore estate was already under serious consideration by multiple parties, and it probably wasn't the right fit. He said this gently, which made it worse. Cornelius asked what made it not the right fit. Trevor said the financing on something at this level was quite complex and they wouldn't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by the process. Cornelius looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he said he understood, and he left. If you have ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere you had every right to be, you already know what that 3-second pause meant. And if you haven't, I want you to sit with it anyway, because it matters. Now, here's what Trevor Holt did not know, and what Kayla Marchetti did not know, and what the senior broker of Hargrove and Whitfield, a man named Douglas Hargrove, the second Douglas Hargrove to run the firm, son of the founder, did not know, because none of them had bothered to look. Cornelius Boateng had not come in asking about the Dunmore estate because he was dreaming. He had not come in to browse. His family had quietly accumulated land and agricultural holdings across 3 counties over 2 decades, purchasing parcels as they became available, always in cash, always without fanfare. The Boateng family operation, held under a numbered company that bore no family name on the public registry, was worth somewhere north of $11 million. Same account he'd had for $31. The same account he'd had for 31 years. He just looked like a farmer. Because he was one. Cornelius did not go home angry that Friday. He went home and had supper with his wife, a days, and he told her what had happened, and she set down her fork and looked at him and said quietly, "What are you going to do?" He thought about it. "Document everything," he said, "and then we'll see." Over the next 2 weeks, Cornelius sent 3 emails to Hargrove and Whitfield, expressing formal interest in the Dunmore listing. He was polite in all of them. He referenced the MLS number. He stated clearly that he was a cash buyer, and that financing would not be required. He received 2 auto-reply acknowledgments and 1 response from Trevor Holt saying the situation was still developing, and he would be in touch. He was never in touch. Meanwhile, the Dunmore listing remained active. Not sold, not under contract. Just sitting there, the way a door sits closed when someone has decided you're not allowed through it. Cornelius also, during those 2 weeks, made a phone call to a woman named Yvette Desrochers, a civil rights advocate based in Barrie who had spent 20 years working on discrimination cases in housing and real estate. He told her what had happened. He told her about the boots and the jacket and the way Trevor Holt had said the word overwhelmed, like it was a kindness. Yvette Desrochers listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "Send me those emails." He did. She also told him to do one more thing. She told him to send a colleague. Someone who did not share his background. Someone in similar work attire. Someone who also did not mention financing. To walk into that office and ask about the Dunmore listing. Cornelius thought about it. Then he called his neighbor, a man named Earl Pemberton, who farmed the land directly west of the Boateng place, and who, when Cornelius explained the situation, said he'd go in Monday morning and he wouldn't even comb his hair. Earl Pemberton walked into Hargrove and Whitfield on a Monday morning in November with hay dust on his jacket and a coffee from the Tim Hortons down the road. He asked about the Dunmore listing. He said he was a cash buyer and that financing wouldn't be an issue. Douglas Hargrove himself came out to meet him. He shook Earl's hand. He offered him a seat. He pulled up the full property package and walked him through it for 45 minutes. Let me say that again. Douglas Hargrove, senior broker, second-generation owner of the firm, came out from his office and sat down with Earl Pemberton for 45 minutes. When Yvette Desrochers reviewed Earl's written account of that meeting alongside Cornelius's 3 unanswered emails, she called in a colleague named Martin O.C. Agumang, a housing discrimination lawyer out of Toronto, who had taken 6 cases to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario in the past decade and won 5 of them. Martin O.C. Agumang made 1 phone call to Hargrove and Whitfield. He did not call Trevor Holt. He called the main line and asked to speak directly with Douglas Hargrove. Douglas Hargrove, it would later be said by people who were there that morning, went the color of old wallpaper, paste, within about 30 seconds of understanding who was on the phone and why. By this point, and here is where the story turns, Cornelius had not said a public word about any of it. He had not posted on social media. He had not called the newspaper. He had continued every day to work his land, to check on his crops, to do the things he had always done. Patient. Methodical. Exact. What Douglas Hargrove did not yet know, what nobody at Hargrove and Whitfield had yet understood, was that the Dunmore estate listing had a complication. The Dunmore family, who were selling the property, had retained their own legal counsel, based in Toronto, to oversee the sale. That counsel was a firm called O.C. Agumang and Associates. Yes, the same Martin O.C. Agumang. He had been retained by the Dunmore family 6 weeks before Cornelius ever walked through that front door. He had not made the connection until Cornelius called him. And when he did make the connection, when he understood that his own client's listing had potentially been withheld from a qualified buyer based on the color of that buyer's skin, which exposed the Dunmore estate to significant legal and reputational liability, he had a very serious conversation with the Dunmore family. The Dunmore family, to their considerable credit, did not hesitate. A woman named Patricia Dunmore, 81 years old, who had grown up on that land and who had particular feelings about how it should be handled and who should be allowed to have it, made a phone call to Cornelius Boateng directly. She introduced herself. She apologized. She said her family had not been aware of what happened and that she was deeply sorry it had. Then she asked if he was still interested in the property. He said yes. And that is how, on a cold Thursday morning in late November, Cornelius Boateng arrived at the offices of a different real estate firm, one retained by the Dunmore family directly, and signed the paperwork on 1,200 acres of Simcoe County farmland. Cash. No financing required, exactly as he had said from the beginning. But that is not quite where this story ends. 3 days after the sale was finalized, Martin O.C. Agumang filed a formal complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario on behalf of Cornelius against Hargrove and Whitfield. The complaint was detailed. It included the 3 unanswered emails, the timestamps, the content of Trevor Holt's response about financing and being overwhelmed, Earl Pemberton's account of his 45-minute meeting with Douglas Hargrove, and documentation that the property remained unsold and unlisted as conditional for the entirety of the period during which Cornelius' inquiries went unanswered. The Ontario Real Estate Council opened our Heirloom investigation. And Yvette Desrochers, because she had spent 20 years watching these things evaporate before they could matter, reached out to a journalist at a regional outlet. She didn't ask for a big story, she just made sure someone had the facts. On the record, the story ran on a Friday. By Sunday, it had been picked up nationally. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something directly. And please leave your answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. When Cornelius left that office the second time, when Trevor Holt told him the process might be overwhelming, what would you have done? Would you have documented everything the way he did? Would you have walked away entirely? Would you have said something in that moment?
Because I think about those 3 seconds he stood there, and I think that in those 3 seconds, Cornelius Boateng made a decision that most of us don't have the discipline to make.
He decided not to react. He decided to build a case instead of an argument. That distinction changed everything. Douglas Hargrove issued a public statement that was, by most accounts, inadequate. It acknowledged that the firm's communication with a prospective buyer had fallen below expected standards. It stopped considerably short of the word discrimination. Martin O.C. Agyemang issued a response to the statement that was 3 sentences long and surgical. Trevor Holt resigned from the firm within the week. He did not issue a statement. Kayla Marchetti, it was later noted, had left the position several weeks earlier for unrelated reasons, which is the kind of thing you note and then set aside. Douglas Hargrove did not resign, but the Ontario Real Estate Council's investigation, which took 4 months, resulted in a finding of discriminatory conduct against the brokerage. Hargrove and Whitfield was required to undertake mandatory bias training across all staff, pay an administrative penalty, and report to the council quarterly for 2 years. Finding was public record. Martin O.C. Agyemang confirmed to the regional outlet that a settlement had been reached in the Human Rights Tribunal matter. He confirmed the terms were confidential. He confirmed his client was satisfied. Cornelius said only one thing publicly in the brief comment he provided to the journalist. He said, "My father bought his first piece of land in 1971. I've been farming it my whole life. I'll be farming this land too." There is something I keep coming back to in this story. It is not the filing of the complaint or the finding of the tribunal. It is the phone call from Patricia Dunmore, the 81-year-old woman who grew up on that land, picking up the phone and calling a man she had never met and saying, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. That moment did not erase what happened, but it did something that legal proceedings by themselves cannot do. It acknowledged him. Cornelius Boateng now farms a combined holding of over 1,200 acres in Simcoe County. He and Adays had their grandchildren up to see the Dunmore farmhouse in the spring, the first year after the purchase, when the fields were just starting to green. His youngest granddaughter, who is 6, ran the full length of the front porch and back 3 times, and then sat down on the steps like it had always belonged to her. Maybe it had. If you've been watching since the beginning of this one, thank you for staying. Stories like this one don't always move fast, and they don't always end clean, but they end true, and I think that matters more. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment. I read every single one. We'll be back soon with another story worth telling.